population of 5,000, you have a warlord who watches over your shoulder on a daily basis, and therefore, how are you able to execute your independent, non-governmental work? And so one has to assess the security as well of people on the ground. NGOs are, I think, the most, are the biggest workforce, the way Ambassador Kamal put it, that are not given their due. They are not thanked much for what they do on behalf of the international multilateral process. They are not in the payroll of the United Nations, and yet they execute many of the work they do precisely because they are found in every nook and cranny, if you will, of the world where the United Nations staff are not to be found, precisely because it is a small institution, both by the sheer amount, by the amount of its budget and by the number of its staff. Every time I go around the world, especially in the Midwest, for example, when I encounter questions about whether the United Nations is an institution that we need, and they talk of it as a big institution but very small in its impact, and then I give them that example that the entire budget of the Secretary General and the Secretariat, and for much of the core work of the United Nations, is far smaller, a small percentage of the entire budget of the trash disposal of the EPA of the City of New York. I mean, this is just the cleanup of the morning trash that are found on the street. The budget for the City of New York for that is bigger than the entire budget of the United Nations for some of its core work. So there is undue expectation also of the United Nations to deliver as much when it does not have that much.
Over to Lehigh for a question from their end.
Okay, you're good. Thank you very much. You both speak of civil society's exclusion from the decision-making process at the UN, yet at the same time speak of civil society's important role in the UN, particularly on the ground. This suggests that, to me at least, that the UN Charter or bylaws or rules need to be rewritten to include civil society at the decision-making table. If this is what you are suggesting, what is the process for amendment?
Very good question. But I come back to my slave owner example. I have slaves. I don't allow them to participate in the decision making in my house, but I love them working outside in my fields, obviously, because that is my workhorse. And so the question is, I don't want them to come inside the house where the decision making is being done, but I want them outside in the field. And now your question makes total sense, which is, how can it be improved? And I don't have the answer to that. We'll ask Mr. Bautista. How can we improve?
I think the dynamic of exclusion and inclusion will always be there, and I think it will be a percentaging. And the United Nations is quite both a wonderful as well as a strange international animal. It's an organization that is made up of several entities that, depending on who chairs it, arrangements for intervention by non-traditional actors, meaning outside of member states, could differ from one chair to another. So at a particular chairship of ECOSOC, the chair may say there will be 5 NGO interventions, and they will have to come at the wee hours of the day when all of the member states that have raised their name tags will have spoken. There will be a chair who will say, there is a list of, there is a paper outside the door, first come, first serve, put the name of your NGOs, and as far as time allows, we will hear as many NGOs. So there is a multiplicity of practices in terms of exclusion as well as inclusion, and it depends on the political culture of the country or perhaps call it whims or caprices of specific chairs or bureaus of meetings.
Hi, I'm Yuvaz Nanli, and I'm a senior global scholar here. And my question is, NGOs have always been grassroots-oriented organizations. Historically, they've been most effective at changing things through ground-level movements by the citizens of nations, not the policymakers. Is this no focus on an NGO voice in the UN a diversion from what should be NGOs' our true force of organizing, informing, and motivating citizens who in turn pressure their policymakers?
No, I disagree totally with this question. What you are saying is that NGOs should confine themselves to motivating governments. I don't think that is what NGOs are. I think NGOs are superior to governments. They should not be motivating governments. They should be controlling governments. And that is why NGOs are underplaying their role at the moment. The governments are not responsible representatives of peoples. Take it from me, in no country, not even the best of democracies, is a government responsible to the people. The only countries, I can think of only two, which have genuine democracy. One of them is Iceland and the other is Switzerland. In Switzerland, you cannot change the color of the parking meters in Switzerland without going through a national referendum. Everything is decided by the people. And there is a referendum every 15 days in Switzerland. The same is true of Iceland. But other countries don't have this system. You are from the United States. The United States is not a democracy. It's a republic. In other words, you only have one right, which is to vote for the government every 4 years. And after that, you have zero rights. That's not democracy. That's a republic. And so the question is, do you want change? Do you want government of the people, for the people, by the people? And I think you should. But then don't acquiesce and don't accept the status quo. React against the status quo in order to achieve a better representation for the people. And that is what I would hope from you. But if, on the other hand, you are happy being a slave, good. There's nothing I like better. I'm an aristocrat and I love my slaves. What about you, sir?
Good to see you again, albeit virtually. I just met him yesterday at the campus of FDU. There are two formats that I would like you to imagine with me. One format of presencing the voice of NGO, not just at the United Nations, but at other international forums, would be the combination of coordinate, cooperate, harmonize. That to me is in the moderating role. In other words, that everyone's voice is, I think this is the laissez-faire method where around the table everyone has a voice, sure. But at the end of the day, one specific voice must find an implementing detail because it is for the betterment of the population and for the solution of a specific issue. The other configuration of NGO activism would be convoke, provoke, invoke. So the convocation, we convoke meetings. Academies, universities are good at organizing convocations and colloquia where issues are discussed. But then you have to move from convoking into provoking. In other words, NGOs are at their best when they are able to challenge member states, not only for what they say, but precisely for the hypocrisy of what they say based on the situation on the ground. There is no human rights that is being promoted on the ground, and yet their official rhetoric in print and in orally submitted are different. So convoke, provoke, and then invoke. The invoke would be it is the statements that NGOs issue. statements alone mean nothing. In fact, they really mean nothing when you are simply adding to the paper